At Thanksgiving, Elijah's wedding was great. When's yours? I said, had mine. You got invitations. Dead silence. Dad, we never got them. I pulled out delivery receipts all signed for. You threw them away. Before I tell you about the explosive fallout that shattered my family forever, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. The living room of my childhood home was suffocatingly warm, practically vibrating with the familiar, overwhelming sense of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and the cinnamon apple pie my mother baked every single year. It was a picturesque American Thanksgiving on the surface. Relatives were sprawled across the expensive leather sofas, digesting their massive meals while a football game played at a low volume on the oversized flat-screen television. But beneath the comfortable surface, the dynamic was exactly the same as it had always been. They were entirely focused on my older brother, Elijah. I was sitting on a stiff wooden chair near the edge of the room, nursing a glass of water, simply observing the people who shared my last name. My cousin Emily sat directly across from me on the love seat. Emily always had this incredibly annoying habit of swirling her expensive red wine and staring at people like they were exhibits in a local zoo. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, smiled a sharp, condescending smile that didn't reach her eyes, and locked her gaze entirely on me. The room happened to grow just quiet enough for her voice to cut sharply through the ambient noise of the television and the clinking dessert plates. "So, Matthew," Emily said, her tone dripping with that fake, sugary sweetness I had come to despise. "Your brother's wedding last month was absolutely amazing. Literally the social event of the year. The venue, the flowers, everything was just perfect. When is yours going to happen? When are you finally going to settle down, find somebody, and get your life on track like Elijah?" The entire room went completely, uncomfortably silent. Forks literally stopped scraping against porcelain dessert plates. My mother, Linda, paused like a frozen statue with a delicate china coffee cup halfway to her lips. My father, Robert, crossed his thick arms over his chest and looked at me with heavy expectation, waiting for me to stumble over my words or look away in shame. It was the exact same look they had given me my entire life. The judgmental, "when are you going to be more like your brother" look. I did not blink. I didn't shift in my seat. I reached down to the floor next to my leather boots, picked up the thick, heavy manila folder I had purposefully brought with me, and set it squarely on the glass coffee table with a solid thud. I looked right back at Emily, my voice completely steady and stripped of any emotion. "I already had my wedding," I said clearly. "Last summer. You all got invitations." The silence in the room shifted instantly from expectant and mocking to utterly shocked. You could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator all the way in the kitchen. My father's face immediately turned a dark, angry shade of red. He slammed his heavy hand down on the armrest of his leather recliner. "What the hell are you talking about, Matthew? We never got any invitations. You are not married. Stop making things up just to steal your brother's spotlight and ruin this holiday." I didn't argue with him. I didn't raise my voice to defend myself. I simply reached forward and opened the manila folder. I pulled out the first piece of paper, a certified postal delivery receipt printed on bright white paper, complete with an official red stamp and a barcode. I slid it across the smooth glass coffee table directly to my mother. "Here is the delivery confirmation for your exact address," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy, suffocating air of the living room. "Signed for by Linda Morrison on June 15th at exactly 10:47 in the morning." My mother stared down at the paper as if it were a venomous snake about to strike her. Her face drained of all color, turning a sickly, pale white. I reached into the folder, pulled out another receipt, and slid it firmly toward my older sister, Claire. "And here is yours, Claire. Delivered to your apartment complex downtown. Signed by you." I kept pulling out receipts, one by one, methodically distributing the undeniable truth. One for my Aunt Linda, one for my Uncle Joe, one for my cousin Emily. Every single piece of paper had their actual, undeniable signatures right there in black ink. "Every single one of you received a formal wedding invitation," I said, looking at the pale, stunned faces surrounding me. They were sent via certified mail. They required a physical signature upon delivery. You held them in your own hands, and then you threw them away. My mother's hand trembled violently as she covered her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. My father stared at the official postal paper sitting on the table in front of him, his jaw tightly locked, a thick vein visibly pulsing on his forehead. But to truly understand how we reached this exact moment of absolute betrayal and confrontation, I have to take you back 28 years. I have to tell you exactly what it is like to be a ghost living inside your own home. Growing up in the Morrison household meant living your entire life under a massive, suffocating shadow. That shadow belonged entirely to Elijah. He was the classic golden child, the firstborn son, the star varsity athlete, the straight-A student who could do absolutely no wrong in the eyes of my parents. Whatever Elijah did was treated as a monumental triumph. Whatever I did was just expected, or far more often, completely ignored. If you have ever lived in a household with a designated golden child, you know exactly what this toxic dynamic is like. It is not always about them openly hating you or yelling at you. It is about the complete, soul-crushing absence of interest in your existence. When Elijah made the varsity baseball team in high school, my parents threw a massive backyard barbecue, inviting half the neighborhood and buying a custom cake. When I won first place in the state science fair a month later, bringing home a massive trophy, my dad just grunted, patted my shoulder without making eye contact, and said, "Put the trophy in your room, Matthew. It's cluttering up the kitchen counter." This relentless favoritism went far beyond simple high school praise. It was deeply financial and intensely emotional. When it came time for college, the disparity between us became undeniably clear. My parents had always talked about a college fund they had set up for the boys. But when Elijah decided he wanted to go to a prestigious, ridiculously expensive out-of-state private university, my parents quietly drained the entire college fund to pay his exorbitant tuition and living expenses. They did not even consult me or save a fraction of it. When I graduated high school 2 years later, I sat at the kitchen table with my mother, looking at a stack of federal financial aid forms and student loan applications. "We just don't have the money right now, Matthew," she said breezily, not even looking up from her smartphone. "You can just go to the local community college down the street and get a part-time job at the grocery store. It builds character. It builds character." That was their perpetual excuse for neglecting me. But they magically always had vast amounts of money for everyone else in the family. A few years later, my Uncle Joe went through a horribly messy divorce and a brutal custody battle over his kids. My parents happily dipped deep into their retirement savings to hire a top-tier, ruthless lawyer for him, claiming they had a moral obligation to protect the family name. When my grandfather passed away a few years after that, the substantial inheritance he left behind was secretly funneled almost entirely to Elijah to help him put a massive cash down payment on a luxury condo in the city. I only found out about the inheritance accidentally by seeing a bank statement left on the counter. When I confronted my dad about it, he just shrugged his shoulders, completely unbothered. "Elijah has a corporate image to maintain, Matthew," he said flatly. "You work in tech behind a screen all day. You don't need that kind of upscale living space." I learned very early on to stop asking for things. I stopped showing them my report cards when I got straight A's. I stopped telling them about my friends or my interests. I learned to navigate my own childhood home like an invisible ghost, stepping softly on the floorboards, never making demands, and never expecting a single ounce of unconditional love. I convinced myself that if I just worked hard enough, if I achieved something massive and undeniable on my own, they would finally look at me and say they were proud. I was so young, and so painfully naive about how deep their bias truly ran. By the time I turned 26, I had built a highly successful life entirely on my own merits. I worked brutal, exhausting hours in the competitive tech industry, grinding late into the night writing code while my peers were out partying or relaxing on the weekends. My relentless hard work finally paid off in a massive way. I landed a huge promotion, stepping into a highly coveted lead developer role at a major firm. It came with a serious six-figure salary, generous stock options, and a level of financial stability I had never known in my life. For the very first time, I felt like somebody important. I felt like I had finally crossed the finish line. I thought this was it. This was the exact moment I could finally earn my rightful seat at the family table. I invited my parents, Elijah, and my older sister Claire to a very high-end, exclusive steakhouse downtown to celebrate. I paid for the entire expensive dinner in advance, wanting to show them that I was successful and capable. We were sitting in this beautiful, dimly lit restaurant. The professional waiter poured expensive vintage red wine into crystal glasses. I took a deep breath, feeling a genuine, hopeful smile spread across my face. "So, I have some really great news to share with everyone," I said, leaning forward, practically buzzing with excitement. "I just got promoted to lead developer at the firm. I'm managing a dedicated team of 12 people now, and the compensation package is incredible." I waited for the reaction. I waited for my dad to raise his glass in a toast. I waited for my mom to smile warmly and finally tell me she was proud of the man I had become. Instead, my mom kept aggressively cutting her filet mignon. "Oh, that's nice, honey," she said in a flat, completely monotone voice. She chewed her food, swallowed, and immediately turned her entire body toward my sister. "Claire, did you end up returning that blue silk dress to Nordstrom? Because I saw a much better one online that would be absolutely perfect for Elijah's upcoming engagement party." I sat there completely frozen in my expensive leather chair. The ambient noise of the busy restaurant seemed to instantly fade away into a dull ringing in my ears. I looked over at my dad. He was busy scrolling through a work email on his phone, completely ignoring the table. I looked at Elijah. He was admiring his own reflection in his polished silver butter knife, looking bored. I had just told my own family that I achieved a massive career milestone, a promotion that secured my entire financial future, and it did not even earn me 30 seconds of their genuine attention. The expensive, perfectly cooked steak in my mouth suddenly tasted like dry ash. I realized right then and there, sitting at that incredibly expensive table I was paying for, that nothing I ever did would be enough for these people. I could single-handedly cure a terrible disease, I could become a billionaire, and my mother would still look right past me to ask Claire about a department store dress. That night, walking back to my car in the cold city air, I made a silent, unbreakable promise to myself. I stopped trying to be seen. I completely and permanently locked them out of my internal life. A few months after that disastrous promotion dinner, my life changed completely on a rainy, miserable Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in a crowded downtown coffee shop, working frantically on my laptop to meet a software deadline. The place was absolutely packed with people escaping the downpour, and there was only one open seat left at my small, wobbly table. That is exactly when Jordan walked up. Jordan was a talented graphic designer, carrying a massive, heavy art portfolio and a soaking wet black umbrella. "Hey, I am so sorry to bother you, but do you mind if I steal this chair and use the wall outlet? My laptop is dying and I have a huge client deadline in exactly an hour." I looked up from my screen and just nodded quietly, gesturing to the chair. We sat in total silence for about 30 minutes, just typing away, listening to the rain hit the large glass windows. Then my old, frayed laptop charger finally gave out. It sparked briefly and died. I groaned loudly, burying my face in my hands in frustration. Jordan looked over, laughed a warm, genuine laugh, slid a universal charger across the table, and said, "Well, looks like I owe you for the seat." We ended up talking for 3 solid hours. Jordan was warm, fiercely intelligent, and incredibly observant. We talked about everything: our stressful jobs, our favorite movies, our secret ambitions. Felt so incredibly easy to talk to them. It felt like breathing pure, fresh air after being trapped in a dusty, windowless room for 2 decades. We started dating almost immediately. Jordan was the bright, guiding light I didn't even know I desperately needed. But it did not take long at all for Jordan to notice the dark, oppressive cloud that hovered over me whenever my cell phone rang. One evening, we were in my small apartment, cooking a nice dinner together. My phone buzzed loudly on the kitchen counter. The caller ID flashed Mom. I stared at it, felt my stomach tie into a knot, and let it ring. It went straight to voicemail. 10 seconds later, my dad called. I sighed heavily, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and answered the phone out of sheer conditioning. Matthew, my dad barked loudly into the receiver. No greeting, no asking how I was. Elijah's luxury SUV is in the shop. Go pick him up from his corporate office downtown and take him all the way to his apartment. Do it now. Dad, I'm literally in the middle of cooking dinner. I live 40 minutes away from his office in heavy traffic. He makes great money, he can afford an Uber. Don't be a selfish brat, Matthew. Your brother had a very long, stressful day at the corporate office. Just do what I said and go get him. And then he slammed the phone down, hanging up on me. I stood there in my kitchen, staring blankly at the dark screen of my phone, my jaw tight with quiet rage. Jordan walked over, gently took the phone out of my hand, and set it down softly on the counter. They treat you exactly like you are their unpaid employee, Jordan said softly, looking me right in the eyes. Why do you let them speak to you like that? I did not have a good answer for that. It's just how they are. It's fine. I'm used to it. It is not fine, Matthew. You are an incredibly kind, successful man. You deserve to be spoken to with basic human respect, especially by your own parents. Nobody had ever defended me before. Nobody had ever looked at my family dynamic from the outside and called it exactly what it was: toxic and abusive. Jordan saw right through my tough, silent exterior and saw the deeply neglected kid hiding underneath. That was the exact moment I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was going to spend the rest of my life with this wonderful person. A few months into our relationship, Jordan invited me over for a traditional Sunday dinner at their parents' house. I was an absolute nervous wreck. My only frame of reference for family dinners involved passive-aggressive insults, being completely ignored, and sitting in silence while listening to everyone lavish praise on a golden child. I ironed my dress shirt 3 separate times and stopped at a specialty store to buy the most expensive bottle of imported wine I could afford. We pulled up to a modest, beautifully kept suburban home with a manicured lawn. Before Jordan could even put the key into the front door lock, the door swung wide open. Patricia, Jordan's mother, stood there wearing a floral apron with a massive, beaming smile on her face. She did not offer a polite handshake. Instead, she stepped forward and pulled me into a tight, incredibly warm, and genuine hug. You must be Matthew. Come in, come in. We have heard so many wonderful things about you, she said, her voice filled with real excitement. I stepped inside the house, feeling incredibly confused by the warm reception. You have. Of course we have. Jordan talks about you absolutely non-stop. Just then, Jordan's father, Aaron, walked out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He gave me a firm, respectful handshake and clapped me warmly on the shoulder. Welcome to the madness, son. Come on in, take your coat off. The pot roast is almost done. That entire dinner was an absolute revelation to me. It shattered everything I thought I knew about families. Nobody looked at their cell phones at the table. Nobody made snide, sarcastic remarks about anyone else. Aaron asked me incredibly detailed questions about my job in the tech industry, genuinely interested in the complex software I was developing. Patricia asked about my hobbies, my favorite books, and what I like to do on the weekends. Jordan's younger sister cracked hilarious jokes and made me laugh until my ribs physically hurt. When I spoke, everybody at the table actually looked right at me. They listened. They actually cared about what I had to say. I felt this strange, heavy, painful lump forming deep in my throat about halfway through the dessert course. I realized, with a sudden wave of emotion, that I was experiencing grief. I was grieving the childhood I was robbed of and the loving family I never had the privilege to grow up in. When we finally said our goodbyes and left, I stayed completely silent as I drove us back to my apartment. The yellow streetlights flickered by in the dark. I gripped the leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned pure white. Suddenly, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotion. I pulled the car over to the side of the dark road, put it in park, and completely broke down. I started crying. Not just a few quiet tears, but deep, heavy, ugly sobs that shook my entire chest. Jordan quickly unbuckled their seatbelt, slid across the center console, and wrapped their arms tightly around my shaking shoulders. "I'm so sorry," I choked out, wiping my wet face aggressively with the back of my hand. "I don't know why I'm crying like this. Your family is just... they are so incredibly nice to me." "They love you, Matthew," Jordan whispered softly, resting their head gently against mine in the dark car. "Because you are lovable. You just grew up in a house full of blind people who couldn't see your worth." That night, a fragile, dangerous seed of hope was planted deep in my chest. I foolishly thought that if Jordan's family could treat me this well after knowing me for just 2 hours, maybe my own flesh and blood could change. Maybe if I brought Jordan home, if they saw how truly happy I was, they would finally wake up and act like a real family. I decided I was going to bring Jordan to the very next Morrison family dinner. Looking back, it was the biggest mistake of my life. 6 months later, feeling a mix of dread and naive hope, I walked into my parents' formal dining room with Jordan standing firmly by my side. We had just officially gotten engaged the night before. Jordan had a beautiful, sparkling ring on their finger, and we were both practically buzzing with nervous happiness. I was terrified of how my family would react, but Jordan squeezed my hand tightly, giving me the silent courage I desperately needed. The family was already seated around the large oak table. Elijah and his fiancée, Rachel, were holding court at the head of the table like royalty. My mother, Linda, was obsessing loudly over the floral arrangements for Elijah's upcoming, incredibly expensive wedding. "I really think the imported white hydrangeas scream elegance and class," my mother was saying to Rachel, completely ignoring the fact that Jordan and I had just walked into the room. I cleared my throat loudly to announce our presence. "Hey everyone, I want you all to meet Jordan." My father glanced up briefly from his bowl of hot soup. "Hi Jordan. Nice to meet you. Sit down quickly. The food is getting cold." He then immediately turned his head back to Elijah. "So, son, did you talk to the luxury caterer about the prime rib carving station?" Jordan and I sat down quietly. For the next excruciating 40 minutes, nobody at that table asked Jordan a single question. Not where they worked, not where they were from, absolutely nothing. It was exactly like my horrific promotion dinner all over again. But this time, it was 1,000 times worse because I was watching my family blatantly disrespect the person I loved most in the world. I could not take the utter disrespect anymore. I grabbed a heavy silver spoon and tapped it sharply against my crystal water glass. The sharp, piercing, clinking sound finally forced everyone to stop talking and look at me. "Listen," I said, my voice loud, firm, and echoing in the dining room. "Jordan and I have some huge, wonderful news. We got engaged last night." I looked around the large table, waiting. I waited for the gasps of surprise. I waited for my mother to jump up from her chair and hug us both. I waited for my brother Elijah to finally congratulate me on something. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. My mother blinked rapidly. She looked down at Jordan's diamond ring, frowned slightly, and then looked back up at me. "Oh, well, congratulations, Matthew. That is very sudden." "We've been dating for over a full year, Mom," I said, feeling the familiar, painful tightness in my chest return. My father wiped his mouth aggressively with a linen napkin. "Well, marriage is a very expensive endeavor. Don't expect us to foot the bill for any of this, Matthew. We are already stretched incredibly thin paying for Elijah's massive wedding. I didn't ask you for a single dime of your money, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "Good," my older sister Claire chimed in from across the table, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Because Elijah's wedding needs to be absolutely perfect. Speaking of which, Mom, did you call the country club venue about the valet parking situation?" And just like that, with a snap of her fingers, the conversation shifted entirely back to Elijah. 30 seconds. That is exactly how long my life-changing engagement announcement lasted in my family's minds. 30 brutal, humiliating, soul-crushing seconds. I looked over at Jordan. Jordan looked right back at me, their eyes filled with deep, heartbreaking pity and understanding. I realized right then that my foolish hope was completely dead. They were never, ever going to change. They were never going to see me as an equal. Right there at that dinner table, I made a silent, unbreakable vow. I was going to marry Jordan, but I was going to do it entirely on my own terms. And I was going to expose my family for exactly who they were. Jordan and I immediately started planning our wedding. We both agreed instantly that we wanted to keep it small, intimate, and as far away from my family's toxic, suffocating grip as humanly possible. We found a beautiful, rustic mountain lodge venue that held exactly 50 people. We invited Jordan's wonderful, supportive family, our closest loyal friends, and my great colleagues from work who actually celebrated my successes. But then came the heavy, unavoidable question of my family. Are you really going to invite them? Jordan asked me one night as we sat on the living room floor, surrounded by a sea of beautiful, custom-printed envelopes. I stared down at the stack of thick, cream-colored invitations with elegant gold foil lettering. A massive part of me just wanted to dump the entire stack involving my family straight into the kitchen trash can. But another part of me, a colder, much more calculating part that had survived 28 years of emotional neglect, knew exactly what my family would do if I simply did not invite them. They would instantly play the ultimate victims. My mother would cry fake tears to all the extended relatives, claiming that I was a cruel, ungrateful son who maliciously shut them out of my life. My father would tell all his business associates that I was too ashamed of my background to bring my new spouse around. I simply could not give them that kind of ammunition to use against me. I am going to invite them, I said slowly, tracing the gold lettering on an envelope. But I know for a fact they won't come. They won't even care enough to respond. So, I am going to make absolutely sure they can never, ever lie about it. The very next morning, before I even went to work, I drove straight to the main post office downtown. I didn't just buy regular postage stamps and drop the envelopes in a blue bin. I paid extra, a lot extra. I sent my parents' invitation, Elijah's invitation, Claire's invitation, and a few others via strict certified mail. I specifically checked the demanding box on the postal form that required a direct, physical signature from the recipient upon delivery. The postal worker printed out and handed me a long, detailed receipt with individual tracking numbers for every single envelope. I immediately took a clear photo of it on my phone, scanned it at the office, and securely saved it to 3 different cloud backup drives. I knew my family better than anyone. I knew their blinding arrogance. I knew they viewed anything with my name attached to it as completely irrelevant junk mail. They were about to walk blindly right into an ironclad trap built entirely by their own narcissism and neglect. A week later, I sat at my computer and logged on to the official Postal Service tracking website. I carefully typed in the long tracking numbers one by one, hitting enter after each one. Delivered. Signed by Linda Morrison. Delivered. Signed by Claire Morrison. Delivered. Signed by Rachel Chin. I saved and printed out the digital delivery confirmations, making sure the timestamps and signature images were perfectly legible. I neatly placed them into a thick manila folder and shoved it deep into the bottom drawer of my home office desk. The trap was perfectly set. Now all I had to do was sit back and wait for the inevitable silence. The absolute final deadline to RSVP for our intimate mountain wedding was exactly July 15th. Throughout the entire month of June and the blazing hot early weeks of July, my cell phone constantly vibrated on my desk. But the notifications were never for me. It was the Morrison Family Updates group chat firing off constantly. It was a relentless, daily, exhausting barrage of messages entirely focused on Elijah's upcoming mega wedding. Elijah finally found his custom Italian tuxedo, followed by 10 heart emojis and fire emojis from Claire. Rachel's parents are paying out of pocket for a massive swan ice sculpture. Mind-blown emojis from my mother. Booking the luxury party bus for the Vegas bachelor party. Every single day, hundreds of messages flooded my screen. I sat there in silence, watching this digital wave of praise and excitement wash over my older brother. On July 10th, exactly 5 days before my strict RSVP deadline, I decided to test the waters one final time. I typed a single, simple, polite message into the chaotic group chat. Hey everyone, just a quick reminder that the RSVP deadline for my mountain wedding is coming up this Friday. I really hope you guys can make it up there. I hit send. I sat back and watched the little red receipts pop up sequentially at the bottom of my phone screen. Mom read it. Dad read it. Claire read it. Elijah read it. I waited. 1 hour passed in silence. 2 hours passed. Finally, my phone vibrated loudly against the wood of my desk. My sister Claire had reacted to my message with a simple, effortless, thumbs up emoji. About an hour after that, my mom reacted with a generic smiley face emoji. That was it. No follow-up questions about where the venue was located. No expressions of excitement. No questions about hotel blocks. And most importantly, no actual RSVPs. Friday, July 15th finally came and went. I walked down to my mailbox and checked the mail every single day that week. The metal mailbox was completely empty. Not a single member of my blood family had bothered to return the pre-stamped, pre-addressed RSVP card I had conveniently provided in the invitation suite. I sat alone on my living room couch in the dark that Friday night, staring blankly at the completely dead group chat screen. The silence from them was absolutely deafening. It was heavier and more painful than any direct verbal insult they could have ever thrown at me. By simply doing absolutely nothing, by completely ignoring my existence, they had screamed loud and clear that my life, my happiness, and my future meant absolutely zero to them. I didn't cry this time. The deep sadness I used to feel had entirely burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard, razor-sharp clarity. They had made their definitive choice. They had signed for the expensive invitations, physically held them in their own hands, and then tossed them straight into the trash without a second thought. I was finally, completely free from the burden of trying to win their love. There was only one lingering loose end left in my extended family: my younger cousin David. Growing up, David and I were actually somewhat close. We used to hide out and play video games in the dark basement during the chaotic, stressful family holidays just to escape the noise and the constant judgment. When I sent out the certified wedding invitations, David was the absolute only relative who actually picked up his phone and texted me about it. Got the fancy invite in the mail, man. Count me in. I wouldn't miss it. Can't wait to see you get hitched to Jordan. It was a small comfort, but it genuinely meant something deep to me. At least one single person from my actual bloodline was going to show up and support me on the most important day of my life. 2 days before the wedding, Jordan and I were frantically packing our bags in the bedroom for the scenic drive up to the mountain lodge. My phone suddenly buzzed on the nightstand. It was a long text message from David. Hey bro, I am so incredibly sorry to do this to you. I caught a terrible stomach bug last night. I've been throwing up everywhere. I definitely can't make the long winding drive up to the mountains in this condition. I'm so sorry to miss your big day. Let's definitely get some beers next month to celebrate. I let out a heavy sigh. It really sucked, but people genuinely get sick. I quickly texted him back, telling him to rest up, feel better, and absolutely not to worry about missing it. Later that same night, I was lying flat on my back in bed, mindlessly scrolling through Instagram to calm my racing pre-wedding nerves. David's profile picture suddenly popped up at the very top of my feed with a brand new story ring around it. I casually tapped it to see what he posted. The high-definition video loaded instantly. Loud, thumping electronic dance music blasted unexpectedly through my phone speakers. Bright strobe lights flashed violently across the screen. There was my sick cousin David, dressed in a sharp clubbing outfit, holding a massive, expensive bottle of champagne with sparklers attached to it, screaming joyfully into the camera lens. He then panned the phone camera around, showing a sprawling, luxury VIP booth in a massive Las Vegas nightclub. And right in the dead center of the booth, wearing a ridiculous plastic crown and holding a shot glass, was my golden child brother, Elijah. Vegas bachelor party for the golden boy. Epic weekend. The neon text caption read. I stared intensely at the glowing screen. My jaw locked so incredibly tight that my back teeth actually ached. David wasn't sick in bed with a stomach bug. My toxic family had purposefully planned Elijah's extravagant bachelor party for the exact same weekend as my actual wedding. And David, the one guy in the family I honestly thought had my back, lied straight to my face just so he could go get drunk in a VIP booth with my brother. I didn't feel angry. I felt a profound, stomach-churning disgust. I calmly took a screenshot of the Instagram story, locked my phone screen, and tossed the device onto the wooden nightstand. What's wrong? Jordan asked sleepily, rolling over in the dark room. Nothing, I said quietly, pulling the warm blankets up to my chin. Just taking out the absolute last piece of trash. When I closed my eyes to sleep that night, the very last lingering thread of emotional attachment I had to the Morrison family snapped entirely in half. I was going into my wedding day as a man with absolutely no blood relatives. And for the very first time in my entire life, I was perfectly peacefully fine with that reality. The mountain air on our wedding day was crisp, cool, and smelled incredibly fresh, like pine needles and morning rain. Our wedding day was nothing short of absolute magic. We rented out a massive, gorgeous rustic lodge with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a sweeping, green valley. There were no extravagant, melting ice sculptures, no stressful corporate networking disguised as a party, and zero family drama. Just 50 amazing people who genuinely, deeply loved us. I stood nervously at the end of the wooden aisle, wearing a perfectly tailored, sharp navy blue suit. When the acoustic guitar music started playing and Jordan finally walked out, my breath literally hitched in my throat. I had never seen anyone look so perfect, so incredibly radiant and happy. I looked out at the small, intimate crowd gathered before us. Patricia was crying happy tears into a lace tissue. Aaron was beaming with immense, fatherly pride. My best friends from college were grinning ear to ear. Even my boss, Mr. Carter, showed up in a great suit and gave me a massive, supportive thumbs up from the second row. As I looked deeply at those 50 smiling faces, a profound, life-altering realization washed over me like a warm wave. I didn't miss my family, not even for a single second. I didn't miss my mother's constant critical whispers or my father's loud, dismissive grunts. I didn't miss Elijah sucking all the oxygen out of the room. The people sitting in those wooden chairs right in front of me were my real family. Blood is just an absolute accident of birth. True loyalty and love are a deliberate choice. We said our heartfelt vows to each other as the sun began to set behind the jagged mountain peaks, painting the evening sky in violent, breathtaking streaks of orange, pink, and deep purple. We danced in the lodge until well past midnight. We drank cheap, cold beer from a cooler and ate incredible, messy barbecue from a local food truck we hired. It was hands down the absolute best night of my entire life, completely untainted by the dark ghosts of my miserable past. When we finally got back to our quiet hotel room, exhausted but thrilled, I took off my suit jacket and looked down at the shiny, heavy gold band resting on my left hand. I was officially a married man. I belonged to someone wonderful, and someone wonderful belonged to me. I casually picked up my cell phone from the nightstand just to check the time. I had 42 unread notifications burning a hole in the Morrison family group chat. I opened the app out of pure, morbid curiosity. Elijah is so unbelievably hungover. Vegas was absolutely insane. David had written, posting a blurry picture of Elijah lying face down on a messy hotel bed. Make sure he drinks plenty of water. We desperately need him looking fresh and depuffed for the final tuxedo fitting next week. My mother replied frantically. Not a single message in that chat asking how my wedding went. Not a single text checking to see if the weather held up or if I was okay. They didn't even know I was officially married. And they clearly didn't care. I turned the phone completely off, threw it into my open suitcase, and went back to my amazing spouse. For long months later, the grand circus finally arrived in town. It was time for Elijah's self-proclaimed event of the decade wedding. The chosen venue was a massive, outrageously expensive private vineyard located upstate. There were live string quartets playing classical music, uniformed valets aggressively driving luxury cars like Porsches and Ferraris, and a bloated guest list packed tightly with my father's wealthy business associates and golf buddies. It felt significantly less like a warm celebration of human love and much more like a cold, calculated corporate merger. I attended the event completely alone. Jordan flat out refused to go and subject themselves to my family, and I absolutely did not blame them one bit. I walked through the massive double doors into the reception hall wearing my absolute best tailored suit, and prominently displayed right there on my left hand was my gleaming gold wedding band. I had been wearing it proudly every single day for 4 months. I quickly found my mother standing near the grand entrance, frantically adjusting the massive gold-framed seating chart. "Hi, Mom," I said smoothly. She barely even glanced in my direction. "Matthew, good, you made it. Your suit looks a little wrinkled in the back. But whatever, there's no time to fix it. Go find your assigned seat. The grand entrance is starting very soon." She didn't look down at my hand, not even a passing glance. During the lavish cocktail hour, I purposely stood directly next to my father and my Uncle Joe near the open bar. I deliberately held my cocktail glass in my left hand. I even repeatedly tapped my heavy wedding ring loudly against the crystal glass while they talked. Clink, clink, clink. "Anyway, the stock market is incredibly volatile right now," my dad was saying loudly to Joe, completely oblivious to the loud metallic clicking happening right in front of his face. The absolute, willful blindness of these people was truly staggering to witness firsthand. I was a legally married man, standing right in front of their faces, practically flashing a bright neon sign, and their brains simply, stubbornly refused to process any new information related to me. When it was finally time for the 5-course plated dinner, I walked over to look for my name on the massive seating chart. My parents, naturally, were seated at table 1 right by the sweetheart table. Elijah's loud college fraternity friends were at table 2. My younger cousins were at table 4. I was placed at table 12. Table 12 was shoved into the very back, dark corner of the massive room, directly next to the loud, swinging kitchen doors where the waitstaff rushed in and out. I was seated with 3 of my father's incredibly distant, boring coworkers, a random second cousin I hadn't seen in over 10 years, and 1 completely empty chair. I sat there silently eating dry, overcooked chicken, watching my father stand up proudly at the front of the room to give his highly anticipated toast. "Elijah," my father said loudly into the microphone, raising his crystal champagne glass high, his voice thick with fake, performative emotion. "You have always been the absolute pride of this entire family. You are a natural-born leader, a true visionary, and today you officially become a husband. We could not possibly be more proud of the incredible man you are." The massive room erupted into thunderous, standing applause. I took a very slow, calm sip of my ice water. I looked across the room at the golden child, happily basking in the glowing spotlight of his seemingly perfect life. The profound injustice of it all used to burn me up fiercely inside. But sitting there at pathetic table 12, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, highly calculated calm wash over me. I knew Thanksgiving was only a few short weeks away. I knew my controlling mother had already mandated in the group chat that absolutely everyone must attend the upcoming family dinner. They naively thought this wedding was the absolute peak of their perfect family narrative. They had absolutely no idea the massive, destructive storm that was coming for them very soon. I quietly slipped out of the back doors and left the lavish wedding before they even cut the ridiculous 6-tier cake. Nobody even noticed I was gone. I drove home in the pitch dark, my gold wedding ring occasionally catching the passing light from the street lamps. The countdown to Thanksgiving had officially begun. The weeks between Elijah's lavish vineyard wedding and Thanksgiving were some of the quietest, most focused days of my entire life. I woke up every morning, went to my demanding tech job, ate dinner with Jordan, and went to sleep. On the surface, I was completely normal. But internally, I was a man meticulously preparing for a hurricane. My mother had sent out her standard dictatorial group text in early November. She demanded that absolutely everyone in the Morrison family be present for Thanksgiving dinner at their house. She explicitly stated there were no excuses allowed, heavily implying that this was going to be a massive celebration of Elijah's new marriage. I stared at that message for a long time. I knew this was my absolute final opportunity. If I did not do this now, I would spend the rest of my life letting them control my narrative. I would forever be the bitter, invisible younger brother who just faded away into the background. I refused to let that happen. I needed physical, undeniable proof. Digital screenshots of postal tracking numbers could easily be dismissed by my father as a computer glitch or some tech trick I fabricated. I needed the hard copies. On my lunch break, I called the main post office downtown. I spoke to a supervisor and explained that I needed the official, physical copies of the delivery confirmations from the certified mail I sent back in June. I needed the exact documents that showed the printed signatures of the recipients. The postal worker was incredibly helpful. She pulled up my tracking numbers and confirmed she could mail the certified copies to my apartment. I paid an exorbitant overnight shipping fee to ensure they arrived well before the holiday. 2 days later, a thick cardboard envelope arrived in my mailbox. I took it inside, sat at my kitchen island, and carefully sliced it open. Inside were the official, watermarked postal documents. They were beautiful. The black ink signatures of my mother, my sister Claire, and my sister-in-law Rachel were printed crystal clear next to the exact timestamps of delivery. These were legal, binding documents. If there was ever a dispute over inheritance or a legal battle requiring a lawyer, these were the exact types of documents that held up in federal court. They were absolute, undeniable proof of my family's total negligence. I bought a heavy, dark manila folder and placed the documents inside in a very specific order. I put my mother's receipt right on top. I left the folder sitting on the entryway table next to my keys. Jordan walked into the apartment after work, took off their coat, and noticed the folder sitting there. They knew exactly what was inside it. Jordan walked over to me, wrapping their arms around my waist. "Are you absolutely sure you want to go through with this, Matthew? This is the nuclear option. Once you put those papers on that dining table, there is no going back. You are going to blow up the entire family dynamic permanently." I leaned down and kissed Jordan's forehead. "I know, and I am entirely at peace with it. The family dynamic blew me up a long time ago, Jordan. I was never truly a part of it. I was just a prop they kept around to make their family photos look complete. I need them to look at the physical evidence of what they did. Even if they try to deny it, I need to say it out loud." Jordan nodded slowly, their eyes filled with deep understanding and support. "What happens after you show them?" "I walk out," I said firmly. "I walk out, I get in my car, and I come right back home to you. And I never look back." "Promise me you will not let them gaslight you," Jordan said softly. "Promise me you won't let your father turn this around and make you feel guilty." "I promise. I am done carrying their guilt." Thanksgiving morning arrived cold, gray, and bitterly windy. I woke up early, took a hot shower, and put on a nice, simple sweater and dark jeans. Nothing overly formal, just armor for the battle ahead. I grabbed my car keys, my wallet, and the heavy manila folder. Jordan walked me to the front door, handing me a travel mug of hot black coffee. "You are stronger than they ever gave you credit for," Jordan said, giving me a tight, reassuring squeeze. "I love you. Call me the second you leave." I drove the 30 minutes to my parents' house in total silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the tires on the cold asphalt. Every street corner, every stoplight brought back a flood of childhood memories. Memories of being overlooked. Memories of standing in the shadows while Elijah soaked up the sun. I parked my car on the street right in front of my childhood home. The driveway was completely packed with expensive cars. I sat behind the steering wheel for 5 full minutes, just staring at the front door. My heart was pounding hard against my ribs. I took one massive, deep breath, grabbed the folder from the passenger seat, and walked up the concrete path to end my family ties forever. I rang the doorbell and waited. The heavy oak door swung open, and my mother stood there wearing a festive apron. She threw her arms open in a wide, theatrical gesture. "Matthew, there you are. We were starting to wonder if you were going to show up at all. Come in. Get out of the cold." She pulled me into a quick, mechanical hug. Felt completely hollow. I stepped inside, immediately hit by the overwhelming wall of heat and the smell of roasting turkey. The house was absolutely packed. My Aunt Linda, Uncle Joe, my cousins Emily and Jason, my sister Claire, and of course Elijah and Rachel. They were all crowded into the living room, laughing loudly and drinking expensive wine. "Look who finally decided to join us," my father called out from his leather recliner, not even bothering to stand up. I set the manila folder down on the hallway entry table, took off my heavy winter coat, and walked into the living room. I gave a few polite nods and found an empty chair in the corner. For the next 2 hours, I sat through the most agonizing dinner of my life. The entire meal was a relentless tribute to Elijah. Elijah and Rachel talked endlessly about their luxury honeymoon in Italy. They passed around a tablet showing professional photos of them drinking wine on the Amalfi Coast. Everyone at the table gushed over how beautiful they looked. My father talked about how proud he was of Elijah's latest corporate presentation. Claire talked about a promotion she was hoping to get. I ate my turkey in silence. I answered direct questions with short, polite sentences, but I offered absolutely nothing else. I was just biding my time, waiting for the inevitable moment when the spotlight would swing toward me, purely out of obligation or boredom. It happened right after the pumpkin pie was served. We had all migrated back into the living room. The football game was droning on the television. My cousin Emily, sitting across from me, swirled her wine and smiled her condescending smile. "So, Matthew," Emily said loudly, cutting through the chatter, "your brother's wedding last month was absolutely amazing. Literally the event of the year. When is yours going to happen? When are you finally going to settle down and get your life on track?" This was the moment. The room went completely silent. Everyone looked at me, waiting for my usual uncomfortable shrug, waiting for me to shrink down and let them feel superior. I stood up slowly from my chair. I walked calmly out into the hallway, picked up the thick manila folder from the entry table, and walked right back into the center of the living room. I stood by the glass coffee table, looking directly at Emily. "I already had my wedding," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. "Last summer. You all got invitations." The reaction was instantaneous. My father's face flushed a deep, furious crimson. He slammed his hand down on the armrest. "What the hell are you talking about, Matthew? We never got any invitations. You are not married. Stop making things up just to steal your brother's spotlight." I didn't flinch. I opened the manila folder. The crisp sound of the paper sliding out seemed to echo in the quiet room. I pulled out the first postal receipt, leaned over the coffee table, and slid it directly in front of my mother. "Here is the official delivery confirmation for this exact address," I said. "Signed for by Linda Morrison on June 15th at 10:47 a.m. My mother looked down. The blood instantly drained from her face, leaving her looking physically ill. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I reached back into the folder. I pulled out the next receipt and slid it across the table toward Claire. "Here is yours, Claire. Delivered to your apartment. Signed by you." I pulled out the third receipt and handed it directly to Rachel. "And here is the one delivered to your condo. Signed for by Rachel Chin." I looked around the room. I made direct eye contact with every single person who had ignored me. "Every single one of you received a formal wedding invitation. I sent them via certified mail because I knew exactly how little you cared about me. I knew you would ignore it. They required a physical signature upon delivery. You held those envelopes in your hands. You saw my name on the return address. And then you threw them in the garbage." My father leaned forward, looking at the receipt sitting in front of my mother. "Linda, what is this?" he demanded, his voice dropping in confusion. My mother's hands began to shake violently. She looked up at me, tears suddenly welling in her eyes. Matthew, I, I saw the envelope, but I didn't think you were serious. I thought it was just a joke. A joke? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. A heavy, gold-lettered envelope from a stationery company, sent via certified mail, and you thought it was a joke? What part of my life has ever been a joke to you? Rachel started crying softly on the sofa. I saw his name on it, she whispered to Elijah, who looked completely stunned. I thought it was junk mail. I'm so sorry. I didn't open it. You didn't open it? I repeated loudly, making sure the entire room heard it, because an envelope with my name on it is considered literal garbage in this family. The living room descended into absolute chaos. Claire was staring at her own signature on the receipt, shaking her head rapidly. This isn't fair, Matthew. You are always so quiet. You never tell us anything about your life. How were we supposed to know you were seriously dating someone? I brought Jordan to this exact house for dinner. I fired back instantly, pointing at the dining room. I sat right there at that table and told you all I was engaged. Do you remember what happened? Mom said, "Congratulations," and then immediately spent the next hour talking about the valet parking for Elijah's wedding. My engagement earned exactly 30 seconds of your time. My father stood up. He was a tall, imposing man, but I did not step back. Now listen here, he yelled, pointing a thick finger at my chest. This is not how you handle family business. If you genuinely wanted us at your wedding, you should have called us. You should have made it clearer. You don't just send a piece of mail and expect everyone to drop what they are doing. I sent certified legal mail, Dad, I said, my voice rising over his. How much clearer could I possibly be? That is the universal standard for inviting people to a wedding. You all knew exactly what to do when Elijah's invitations went out. Everyone RSVP'd immediately. The group chat had hundreds of messages. But for me, absolute silence. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I opened the group chat and held the screen up. I even sent a reminder message in July. Claire gave it a thumbs up. Mom gave it a smiley face. Not a single person asked a follow-up question. Not a single person cared. My mother was openly sobbing now, clutching a napkin to her face. We made a terrible mistake, Matthew. Please, you have to forgive us. We didn't understand. You understood perfectly, I said, my voice turning to ice. You just didn't care. And you want to know the absolute worst part of all of this? The part that proves exactly how invisible I am to all of you. I held up my left hand. I spread my fingers wide so the heavy gold wedding band caught the light from the chandelier overhead. I have been wearing this wedding ring for 4 months. I wore it to Sunday brunch at this house. I wore it to Elijah's massive vineyard wedding. I sat at table 12, the furthest table in the room, and I tapped this exact ring against my glass while you were standing right next to me. Dad, not a single one of you noticed it. Not one. Because you do not look at me. You have never looked at me. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of total defeat. My father slowly lowered his hand and sank back into his leather recliner, his eyes fixed on the gold band on my finger. Elijah looked away, staring firmly at the floor. Claire covered her mouth, looking genuinely horrified by her own behavior. I looked at the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I saw their embarrassment, their shame, and their pathetic attempts to save face in front of the extended relatives. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment 1 below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I slowly bent down, gathered the postal receipts from the coffee table, and placed them neatly back into the manila folder. I closed the clasp. The sound was sharp and definitive. My wedding was absolutely beautiful, I said quietly, looking directly at my weeping mother. It was in the mountains. The weather was perfect. My new family was there. Jordan's parents, Jordan's siblings. People who had known me for less than 2 years, but who actually cared enough to show up, to listen, and to celebrate my happiness. My friends were there. My boss was there. 50 people who actually value my presence. "We value you," my mother choked out, taking a step toward me, her hands reaching out in a desperate plea. "Please, Matthew, don't do this. We can fix this. Bring Jordan over right now. We will order food, we will open champagne, we will celebrate your marriage right now. Just let us make it right." I looked at her outstretched hands and felt absolutely nothing. The well of forgiveness had run completely dry. "You don't want to meet Jordan, Mom?" I said, shaking my head slowly. "You just want to stop feeling guilty. You want to patch this up quickly so you don't have to look like the terrible parents you actually are in front of Aunt Linda and Uncle Joe. You want to go back to pretending we are a perfect family. But we aren't." "You are my son," my father said, his voice gravelly, stripped of his usual booming authority. "You don't just walk away from your blood. You walked away from me 28 years ago, Dad," I replied, grabbing my winter coat from the chair. "You drained the college fund for Elijah. You spent the inheritance money on Elijah's down payment. You never asked about my career. You never cared about my salary. You just kept me around to fill an empty chair. I am done filling the chair." I shoved my arms into my coat sleeves and zipped it up. "Matthew, please," Claire cried out, standing up. "We are a family. People make mistakes. Throwing away my wedding invitation wasn't a mistake, Claire," I said, walking toward the front hallway. "It was a choice. Ignoring my text was a choice. Treating me like a ghost was a choice. And now I am making mine." My mother ran into the hallway, physically blocking the front door. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "If you walk out that door right now, Matthew, you are breaking this family's heart." I looked down at the woman who gave birth to me. "If you actually loved me, Mom, you would have opened the envelope." I gently but firmly reached out, moved her by the shoulders out of my way, grabbed the brass handle, and pulled the heavy oak door open. The freezing November wind immediately hit my face, biting and harsh, but it felt incredibly clean. I stepped out onto the porch. Behind me, the house was erupting into shouting. My father yelling at my mother, Claire crying loudly, Uncle Joe asking what the hell was going on. I didn't turn around. I walked down the concrete path, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of 28 years completely lifting off my shoulders. With every step I took toward my car, I felt lighter, taller, and more alive than I ever had in my entire existence. I got into my car, slammed the heavy door shut, and started the engine. The heater blasted warm air against my cold hands. Before I could even put the car into drive, my cell phone, sitting in the cup holder, began to vibrate violently. The screen lit up. Mom calling. I hit the red decline button. 2 seconds later, it vibrated again. Dad calling. Decline. Claire calling. Decline. Elijah calling. Decline. I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the large suburban house in my rearview mirror. As I drove down the darkening streets, the phone simply did not stop vibrating. It was a relentless, desperate buzzing. They were panicking. For the first time in their lives, they had completely lost control of the narrative, and they had lost their reliable scapegoat. By the time I merged onto the highway to head back to the city, the text messages started flooding in. They popped up at the top of my screen in rapid succession. "Matthew, please come back, we need to talk about this. You are being completely unreasonable, turn the car around right now. Bro, please, Mom is having a panic attack, you need to come back inside." I didn't read past the first few words of any of them. I felt a strange, profound sense of peace settling over my entire body. I wasn't angry anymore. The fiery rage I had felt standing in their living room had completely burned out, leaving behind a smooth, hard surface of indifference. I turned the radio on, found a station playing classic rock, and just drove. When I finally pulled into the parking garage of my apartment building, I looked down at my phone. I had 118 missed calls and over 60 text messages. I picked up the device, navigated to the settings menu, and completely powered it down. The screen went black. I took the elevator up to our floor, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. The apartment smelled like garlic, roasted chicken, and the expensive pine candle Jordan loved to burn. It smelled like my actual home. Jordan was sitting on the living room couch, wearing oversized gray sweatpants and a comfortable hoodie, holding a mug of tea. The second they heard the door click, they stood up, their eyes wide and searching my face for any sign of devastation. I dropped my keys in the bowl, took off my coat, and smiled. It wasn't a forced smile. It was genuine. "You did it?" Jordan whispered, walking over and wrapping their arms tightly around my neck. I buried my face in Jordan's shoulder, breathing in their familiar scent. "I did it." I showed them everything. The receipts, the ring, all of it. How did they react? "Exactly how you would expect," I said, pulling back to look at my spouse. Denial, fake tears, blaming me. But I didn't stay to listen to it. I just walked out. We walked over to the couch and sat down together. I spent the next hour telling Jordan every single detail. I told them about Emily's condescending question, the look of sheer terror on my mother's face when the receipt hit the table, and the pathetic excuses my father tried to yell at me. Jordan just listened, holding my hand tightly, occasionally squeezing it when the story got intense. When I was finally finished talking, I felt completely drained, but in the best way possible. Like I had just finished running a grueling marathon and could finally rest. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the dead cell phone, walked over to the kitchen junk drawer, and tossed it inside. I closed the drawer with a solid thud. "You're not going to turn it back on?" Jordan asked. "No," I said, walking back to the couch and pulling Jordan against my chest. "I'll buy a new phone tomorrow with a new number. That part of my life is officially over." The weeks following Thanksgiving were incredibly peaceful. I bought a new phone, transferred my contacts, and only gave the new number to my boss, my friends, and Jordan's family. I completely ghosted the Morrison family. I didn't block them on social media. I just deleted the apps entirely. I removed myself from their digital existence just as thoroughly as I had removed myself from their physical one. We celebrated a quiet, beautiful Christmas together in our apartment, drinking spiked hot cocoa and watching terrible holiday movies. No passive-aggressive comments, no forced gift exchanges, no drama. Then, in mid-January, I walked down to the lobby to check our mail. Intermixed with the usual credit card offers and utility bills was a small, pale blue envelope. The handwriting on the front was incredibly neat, cursive, and slightly shaky. It was addressed to me, but the return address was a small town 2 states away. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my Grandma Betty, my father's mother. I carried the letter upstairs, sat at the kitchen island, and carefully sliced it open. I pulled out a single sheet of lined stationery paper. I took a deep breath and began to read. "Dearest Matthew, I am writing this letter because your father called me after Thanksgiving, screaming about what happened. He told me you came over and ruined the holiday by yelling about a secret wedding. Matthew, I need you to know the absolute truth. I never received an invitation to your wedding. If I had known you were marrying that wonderful person you told me about on the phone last year, I would have bought a plane ticket and been there in a heartbeat, even with my bad knees. I pressed your father for the truth. He finally admitted that your mother, Linda, intercepted the mail. She saw the certified letters arriving at the house. She knew exactly what they were, but she intentionally hid mine, and she threw hers away, because she was terrified that your wedding would distract the extended family from Elijah's big vineyard wedding. I am so incredibly sorry, my sweet boy. You have always been such a bright, wonderful light in this family, and it breaks my heart that they treated you so cruelly. Please know that I love you very much. I hope you and Jordan are immensely happy. Please send me a picture of the ceremony if you have one. Love always, Grandma Betty." I sat perfectly still, staring at the blue ink on the page. The sheer, calculating toxicity of my mother was almost hard to comprehend. She didn't just ignore my invitation. She actively intercepted my grandmother's mail to ensure I would have absolutely no one from my family at my wedding. She deliberately sabotaged me just to protect the golden child spotlight. Any tiny, microscopic lingering doubt I had about cutting them off evaporated instantly. I was dealing with deeply broken, manipulative people. When Jordan came home, I showed them the letter. Jordan read it and sighed heavily. "I am so sorry, Matthew. That is purely evil." "Don't be sorry," I said, taking the letter back and smiling softly. "It just proves I made the absolute right choice. And it proves my grandma actually loves me." The next day, I went to a local print shop. I printed out a beautiful, high-quality 8 by 10 photograph of Jordan and me standing at the mountain altar, holding hands and laughing. I bought a nice silver frame, carefully packaged it, and mailed it directly to Grandma Betty, along with a handwritten card thanking her for her love and promising to call her from my new number. It was the only connection to my past I chose to keep. Fast forward 6 months. It was early summer, exactly 1 year since Jordan and I had gotten married. My professional life had taken off like a rocket. The tech firm I worked for was officially acquired by a massive global corporation. During the intense transition period, I stepped up and successfully managed the integration of our software systems. My direct boss, Mr. Carter, the CEO who had attended my wedding, called me into his massive corner office one Friday afternoon. "Matthew," Mr. Carter said, leaning back in his leather executive chair, "you have been absolutely instrumental during this merger. The new corporate board is incredibly impressed with your leadership. We are officially creating a new position. I want you as the Senior Director of Engineering for the entire North American division." I was completely stunned. The promotion came with a massive salary increase, an executive bonus structure, and a level of authority I had only dreamed of. All those late nights, all that grinding, had finally paid out in the biggest way possible. I rushed home and celebrated with Jordan. We opened an expensive bottle of champagne and immediately started looking at real estate listings, realizing we could finally afford to buy a beautiful house in the suburbs. But the universe has a very funny way of balancing the scales. Karma rarely acts quickly, but when it finally arrives, it hits with devastating precision. Later that week, I got a text message from my younger cousin Samuel. Samuel was the quiet kid in the family, the one who always kept his head down to avoid my parents' wrath. I had given him my new number a few months prior just to stay in touch. "Hey man," Samuel texted. "Just wanted to give you a heads up on some crazy family drama. Thought you might want to know." "What happened?" I replied. "Elijah got fired." I stared at the screen, my eyebrows shooting up. "Fired? From the corporate firm?" Samuel typed back quickly. "Yeah." The firm went through a massive restructuring. Apparently, Elijah's performance has been terrible for the last year. He was completely coasting. They laid off his entire department, but they specifically didn't offer him a severance package because of some major HR complaints about his arrogance. He is completely broke. He blew through all that inheritance money on the wedding and the luxury condo. He had to break his lease. I took a slow sip of my coffee, reading the text over again to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. "Where is he living?" I asked. "He and Rachel had to move back into his old childhood bedroom at your parents' house. Your dad is furious because he has to support them, and your mom is having a meltdown because Rachel is constantly fighting with her about the cooking. The house is a complete war zone." I set my phone down on the kitchen counter. For 28 years, I had watched my parents sacrifice my college fund, my emotional well-being, and my sanity to build a golden pedestal for Elijah. They had bet their entire family legacy on him. And now, the golden boy had lost his high-paying job, lost his luxury condo, and was sleeping in his childhood twin bed while his new wife fought with his mother in the kitchen. I didn't reply to Samuel. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to call my parents and rub my massive new senior director salary in their faces. The absolute best revenge in the world is living a massively successful, happy life while the people who hurt you slowly destroy themselves with their own toxicity. I simply picked up my coffee, walked over to Jordan, and kissed them deeply. By late August, Jordan and I officially moved out of our cramped city apartment and bought a beautiful, spacious house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. It had a massive backyard, a huge kitchen with a marble island, and plenty of room for us to grow. To celebrate the new house and my massive promotion, we decided to host a late summer dinner party. We invited Jordan's parents, Patricia and Aaron, Jordan's sister Maya, and a dozen of our closest friends and colleagues. The evening was absolutely magical. The warm summer breeze blew through the open sliding glass doors. I was standing at the kitchen island, expertly carving a massive roast beef, while Aaron stood next to me, pouring generous glasses of red wine and telling a hilarious story about a fishing trip he took in college. "I swear to you, Matthew," Aaron boomed, laughing so hard his face turned red. "The fish was the size of a golden retriever." And Patricia just looked at me and told me to throw it back because it didn't match the curtains. The entire kitchen erupted into roaring laughter. Patricia playfully swatted Aaron's arm with a dish towel. Jordan was leaning against the counter, holding a glass of wine, smiling at me with a look of pure, unadulterated love. The laughter and the music were so loud, so full of genuine joy, that around 9 o'clock, there was a gentle knock at our front door. I wiped my hands and went to answer it. Standing on the porch was our new next-door neighbor, an older gentleman named Mr. Henderson. He looked a little hesitant. "Hi there," Mr. Henderson said politely. "I am so sorry to bother you folks. It's just that the laughter is carrying right over the fence, and my wife and I were trying to watch a movie." "Oh man, I am so incredibly sorry," I said instantly, feeling a flush of embarrassment. "We just moved in, we're having a housewarming dinner. I will absolutely go turn the music down and ask everyone to lower their voices. I apologize." Mr. Henderson looked past me into the brightly lit house. He saw the massive spread of food, the bottles of wine, and Patricia laughing loudly in the kitchen. He smiled a warm, genuine smile. "Actually," Mr. Henderson said, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "it smells absolutely incredible in there. And to be honest, it is really nice to hear people so happy. Our kids live out of state. Do you happen to have enough roast beef for 2 more? I grinned widely, stepping back and pulling the door wide open. "Mr. Henderson, we have enough roast beef to feed a small army. Please, go grab your wife and come right over." 10 minutes later, the Hendersons were sitting at our massive dining table, drinking wine and laughing with Aaron and Patricia. I stood in the corner of the room, just observing the chaotic, beautiful scene. I thought back to the horrific, silent, intensely stressful dinners at the Morrison house. I thought about the constant walking on eggshells, the desperate begging for attention, the feeling of being completely invisible in a room full of people. Looking at my new living room, filled with loud, boisterous, loving people who actually wanted to be there, who actually wanted to share a meal with me, I realized I had finally done it. I had broken the generational curse. I had built the family I always deserved. The dinner party finally wound down around midnight. The guests hugged us warmly. The Hendersons promised to have us over for a barbecue next weekend, and Patricia and Aaron drove back to their house. Jordan and I spent the next hour quietly cleaning up the kitchen. We loaded the massive dishwasher, wiped down the marble counters, and put the leftover food into containers. The house was quiet again, but it was a comfortable, settling quiet. I walked into my new home office to turn off the desk lamp. I opened the bottom drawer of my heavy wooden desk to put away some mail. Sitting right there in the very back of the drawer, covered in a thin layer of dust, was my old powered-down cell phone. I had brought it with us during the move, mostly out of habit, but I hadn't touched it or charged it in almost a year. As I reached in to push it further back into the dark corner, my finger accidentally brushed against the power button. To my complete surprise, the screen flickered weakly to life. It must have had a tiny sliver of battery power left. The bright Apple logo appeared, illuminating the dark drawer. I stood there, frozen, staring down at the glowing rectangle. A few seconds later, the home screen loaded, and immediately the notifications began to populate. The screen rapidly filled with dozens of banners. Voicemails from my mother, text messages from Claire, missed calls from my father. They had apparently never stopped trying to reach the old number. They were still out there, completely trapped in their own toxic cycle, desperately trying to pull their reliable scapegoat back into the miserable fold. Jordan walked into the office, drying their hands on a towel. They saw me standing perfectly still, staring down into the open desk drawer. Jordan walked over and looked over my shoulder at the brightly lit phone screen. "It still has battery?" Jordan asked softly. "Just a little," I replied, my voice calm. Jordan leaned against my side. "Do you ever wonder what they are saying? Do you ever want to read those messages, just to see if they actually apologized? Just to see what they think now?" I took a slow, deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs completely. I looked at the names flashing on the screen. Linda, Robert, Elijah. Names that used to dictate my entire emotional state. Names that used to hold absolute power over my self-worth. I said honestly. I used to lie awake at night, desperately wanting them to finally see me. I wanted them to call me and say they were proud of me. I spent 28 years completely exhausting myself, trying to earn a spot at a table where the chairs were purposely removed. I reached my hand into the drawer. "But I don't want that anymore," I said, looking away from the screen and turning to look directly into Jordan's eyes. "I don't need it, because I am not invisible here. Not in this house. Not in this life. Not with you." Jordan smiled a soft, beautiful smile and rested their head against my chest. "Good. Because you were never invisible to me, Matthew." I looked down into the drawer one last time. I pressed my thumb firmly against the power button and held it down. The screen prompted me to slide to power off. I swiped my finger across the glass. The screen went completely black, plunging the drawer back into darkness. I shut the heavy wooden drawer with a final, satisfying thud. I turned off the desk lamp, wrapped my arm tightly around my spouse, and walked out of the dark office, stepping fully into the bright, warm life we had built together. Took me nearly 3 decades of pain to finally figure out the truth about family. Love is not something you should ever have to earn through silence, patience, or by making yourself small and easy to forget. True love is loud. It shows up when it matters. It remembers your milestones. And if it doesn't do those things, then it simply isn't love. I let the phone stay in the dark drawer. I let the pathetic, desperate apologies pile up where I would never see them. I let my old, cold seat at the Morrison family table remain permanently empty. And in the massive, beautiful space they left behind, I built something real. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics can be incredibly complicated, and sometimes the hardest, most painful choice you ever make is also the most necessary one for your own survival. Walking away from the people who are supposed to protect you is terrifying, but I promise you, the peace you find on the other side is absolutely worth it. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member or friend to protect your own mental health? I would really love to read your stories down in the comments below. We can all learn so much from each other's strength. And finally, if you are hearing my voice right now, that means you made it to the very end of the video. You are officially part of what I like to call the 1% Club. Please go down to the comments right now and type the letter W for winner. That is our secret signal. It lets me know exactly who the amazing, dedicated people are that stayed with me until the final word. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel out more than you know. And don't forget to follow and subscribe so we can hang out and share more incredible stories together in the future. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.